Sega.
OutRun is one of the most well-known Sega games of all time. It inspired me to get into racing games, so this channel might not have existed without me encountering this arcade classic. Inspired by the 1981 movie The Cannonball Run, you control a rich young dude in a red Ferrari Testarossa convertible with his blonde female passenger and guide them through many varied locations across the world, trying to get them to the end goal before the timer runs out. First, we'll look at the 1986 arcade version, running on bespoke OutRun hardware. This I'll be emulating in MAME. Next, we'll look at the PC-DOS version, which released in 1989. We'll investigate both the standard version and the version optimised for Tandy hardware. Then we'll look at the port inside Shenmue 2, part of the Shenmue 1 and 2 remaster from 2018. After that, we'll take a look at the versions included in the Ryu Gakutoku Studio games to date, which started with Yakuza 0 in 2018, Yakuza 6 The Song of Life in 2021, Yakuza Like a Dragon in 2020, yes, the 7th game came out before the 6th one on the PC, and rounding out with Judgment, which hit the PC in 2022. There are differences between the versions. Finally, we'll also consider Cannonball, a fan-made enhanced OutRun engine, to see what that offers. The arcade version released in 1986 on bespoke hardware. It also came in a range of cabinets, including the upright, shown on the left here, and the deluxe sit-down unit shown in the middle. The well-known deluxe version featured a motor that moved the entire cabinet left and right as you steered. There were a couple of other units not shown here, a mini upright version and an alternate sit-down version without the car-shaped cabinet. The game's attract mode shows your car driving an entire route through the game, which then loops back to the start. Periodically, the high score table comes up. Note that the number 1 player is called Yu, as in Yu Suzuki, the lead developer. This is then followed by an animated OutRun logo before the attract mode continues. When you begin the game, and uniquely for games of the era, you can choose one of 3 classic tunes to play whilst driving. I've picked my favourite, Magical Sound Shower. The first stage is called Coconut Beach. Note that due to the complex graphics, the game only runs at around 30 frames per second, which was lower than many racing games, but necessary in order to look this good. You simply have to complete each stage before the timer runs out. Your car has a low and high gear in order to help with some of the later, sharper turns. You have to avoid hitting traffic and the scenery on your way. Another unique feature is at the end of each stage. The track branches left and right, and you can choose which path to take. Here we go left into the tunnel-like gateway stage. Continuing to take the left-hand path each time, you progress through a desert stage, a wilderness stage, and finally a stage set in a vineyard. Completing this plays an amusing animated end sequence. Whoops. The map is then displayed, showing the path you took, before you get to enter your name in the high score table. Look, I beat you, Suzuki. The tune on the high score table is called Last Wave. Going back to the map for a second, it's worth noting there are a couple of versions of the game with a different stage order. The original version released in Japan had a different sequence, which you can see here. If I flip to the international version, note how the Gateway Tunnel stage and the Devil's Canyon stage move back to be the second stages you encounter. The reasoning behind this was to expose players, and those who might want to play next, to the more graphical standout stages early on, in case they found it too hard to get to them. This game also has a few funny moments. In addition to the end sequences, if you fail to leave the starting line, the flagman encourages you a few times, then turns his back on you. Plus, if, or should I say when you crash, your female partner often tells you off. Actually, the crashes are another memorable part of OutRun, especially the ones that see your car tumbling through the air. No one wore a seatbelt in the 1980s, obviously. Let's enjoy a minute of arcade gameplay without me talking over the top. Here's a sample of the Coconut Beach, Devil's Canyon and Gateway stages, each one with a different tune. The DOS version released in 1989 and since then has been available both on 5.25-inch floppy as well as 3.5-inch discs. The game was programmed by Unlimited Software Inc., who used this logo. However, Unlimited Software Inc. was actually a couple of developers from Distinctive Software Inc. who had an extremely similar logo. Distinctive worked on games such as Test Drive and Grand Prix Circuit for Accolade, who immediately sued Distinctive as they'd used software libraries developed for Test Drive 2 to make OutRun. However, Accolade lost the case and OutRun wasn't removed from sale, which means we can look at it. Yay! The game begins with a choice of graphic modes. I'll skip the low-colour CGA and Hercules modes and focus on the 16-colour EGA/VGA and Tandy options. Both of these look identical but sound very different. When you start the EGA/VGA mode, you see a picture of the start line, followed by the OutRun logo and programmer details. Then it goes into the radio select screen. The three tunes are recreated in simple bleep chip sounds, plus there's an option for sound effects only. This really does sound like the Test Drive and Grand Prix Circuit games. Let's start again with my favourite tune and have a quick look at the same stages I passed in the arcade version. Apart from the graphic and audio downgrade, the main difference between this version and the arcade is how traffic takes a long time to come down and past you, which means you can end up with a virtual traffic jam in the distance to avoid. Also, your car feels really heavy here, though I am playing on keyboard. The road splits are present, so let's have a quick look at the stages on the left-hand Route A sequence. The Gateway stage is somewhat cut back, as there are only so many sprites a PC at the time could handle. The Desert stage actually has more scenery than the arcade, but it lacks the sandy surface and dunes at the side of the road. Wilderness actually looks more like a desert stage, perhaps the developers mixed them up. Finally, the Vineyard stage feels a bit like the arcade. Despite this game coming on floppy disks, it still managed to cram in the animated end sequences. Here you can see the same one that played out in the arcade. Ouch, again. The map exists too, before you're put through a rather screechy version of the high score table music. However, much like many games of the era, this also supported Tandy hardware, with much improved audio. The Tandy version begins with a surprise intro voice.
Sega Computer Software presents OutRun,
before the title screen comes up. There's an alternate later version with a female speaking the voiceover instead. The graphics in the Tandy version are unchanged from the standard DOS version, but the music sounds better. In-game, the Tandy version combines its multi-channel audio with sampled sounds, which adds a fair bit to the game, although the tyre squeal gets repetitive quickly. Crashes in the DOS version attempt the style of the arcade, with your female partner sometimes even pointing the way to go. And here's a quick clip of the Tandy high score table, which sounds much less screechy than the bleep chip version. Now, let's watch a minute of the DOS version. I'll switch between the bleep chip and Tandy across the same stages I showed in the arcade version. OutRun appears as a playable game inside Shenmue 2, which was released as part of the Shenmue 1 and 2 remaster in 2018. In Shenmue 2 you'll find the game tucked away in Hong Kong's Pine Game Arcade alongside some fetching neon. An interesting feature of these Shenmue ports is that you can choose how many credits you want to put into the game, up to 9.
$5 a game. Looks like fun.
The game renders in letterbox with slight filtering. You'll notice the car's Ferrari Testarossa design was changed, along with several of the cars you pass in-game, in order to avoid copyright issues. Unfortunately, parts of your car use the same flickering colour as used on the tyres, making the car itself rather flickery. The sprites also scale strangely, often showing higher resolution than the arcade original. There's also a major bug with shadows in this port, as they are flat shades of grey and not transparent. This wasn't an issue in the Dreamcast original version of Shenmue 2 though. The sound is also a bit broken, with the mix sounding a little off and your car engine noise not revving on the start line correctly. Finally, the car handling is rather heavy and continues a little after you've finished steering, meaning you'll have to correct your position more than the arcade, which makes it more difficult. Let's watch a minute of this port to see how it looks and sounds. At the time of making this video, OutRun has appeared in a number of games by Ryuga Kotoku Studio. It's playable in Yakuza 0 from 2018, Yakuza 6 A Song of Life from 2021, Yakuza Like a Dragon from 2020, as mentioned the 7th game in the series came to the PC before the 6th one, plus it appears in the PC version of Judgment, which made it to the PC in 2022, once licensing rights were sorted out on the lead actor. Yakuza 0 is set in the 1980s, so you need to go into this smaller Sega high-tech land arcade to find OutRun. This is the only Yakuza title with an amusing introduction before you play the game. Once you've been shown the controls, you can then adjust the screen size. We'll go for full screen, non-stretched. This is the only version of Yakuza which doesn't have fake arcade plastic surrounding the sides of the screen when running like this. One issue with the Yakuza 0 port is that the game often loads with this soft blur filter applied. It doesn't always do this though, and sometimes appears pixel sharp. All the classic arcade games are affected with this issue in Yakuza 0. The second issue is that the picture is scaled slightly differently, with part of the top and bottom of the screen being cut off. This is more noticeable in OutRun than the other arcade games, as the speedometer bar is now half chopped off the bottom of the screen. I'll go through this in more detail in the Pixel Compare screenshot sequence later on. In Yakuza 6 A Song of Life, Sega's high-tech land is now rebranded Club Sega. You'll find the game in the larger arcade downstairs. This is the only version of Yakuza where you can choose the difficulty level simply by choosing the cabinet you want to play. In-game there's a small amount of background street noise still noticeable. Once again, you can set the screen aspect ratio before playing. Unlike all the other Yakuza and Judgment games though, the picture is scaled at a full 4:3 aspect ratio, with no pixels being chopped off. I expect this might be related to Q-Lock handling this port, unlike the other Yakuza titles. The blur filter that sometimes appeared in Yakuza 0 is also gone. However, the audio is slightly more quiet. The car handling doesn't feel quite as sharp though. Yakuza Like a Dragon has the cabinet in the larger Club Sega arcade again, but this time it's upstairs. This port is the same as the one in Yakuza 0, with a fraction of the top and bottom of the screen chopped off. At least it's pixel sharp. The audio is much louder than Yakuza 6. I'm not a fan of the fake plastic arcade screen surrounds though. When Judgment originally released, your office contained a cabinet playing a remastered Puyo Puyo, but in the PC version it's been replaced with OutRun. When you start the game, you'll notice the background street noise keeps playing quite loudly, which is a bit annoying. Gameplay-wise, this is identical to the version in Yakuza 0 and Yakuza Like a Dragon. But which is the best version? It's hard to say as they all play fairly similarly. Yakuza 0 hides the fake plastic surround when running full screen, but can appear blurry. Yakuza 6 shows the full screen image, as per MAME, but there's a tiny bit of noticeable street noise in the background, and the handling doesn't feel quite as sharp. For me, Yakuza Like a Dragon might be slightly ahead of Judgment, as there's no background street noise whilst playing, but you do lose a bit of the picture either way. My Sega comparison videos usually only show original, Sega authorised commercial games, but it'd be remiss of me not to touch on Cannonball, the enhanced OutRun engine for PC. Named after the movie that inspired the arcade game, this was created by solo developer Chris White and is a ground-up, re-engineered version of OutRun that uses the original arcade ROM data, but improves on it immensely. Whilst there are many additional features available, it is possible to run the game looking arcade identical. But why would you want to do that when you can have 60 frames per second, widescreen, enhanced sprites and a higher resolution road layer? You can optionally now hear the music before the game starts, plus the music had repeating cymbals fixed, most noticeably in Splashwave, which sounds much cleaner. In-game, the car handling can be tweaked to how you see fit. Force feedback is fully integrated, in MAME you need a plugin. Oh, and you can switch the camera position to this optional high level, and bumper cam. On top of that, if you don't like the red car, how about trying a blue, yellow, green, or cyan Ferrari? There are a lot more features still. You can improve your car stats to drive off-road better or be stronger. You can run all the stages in one continuous sequence without splits, or do a time trial with no other cars on the road. You can try an early prototype of the first stage. You can even craft new stages in a separate layout program and drive them in-game. In short, it's possibly the best way to play OutRun on a PC. Take a look at a minute of gameplay in Cannonball to see what I mean. Let's compare all 8 versions of the game at the pixel level. We'll look at the same frame of gameplay in each version. First, here's the arcade version set to 4:3 aspect ratio. Now, let's wipe across to the DOS port, and you can see it's a pretty basic recreation. Switching back to the arcade, this time I've set the screen to integer scaling, meaning each pixel is the correct size. This causes the game to have black borders at the top and bottom. If I now wipe across to the version in the PC Shenmue 2 port, you'll see that the road layer is identically placed, but the sprites are more to the left. Also notice the flat, non-transparent shadows and the higher resolution sprites, particularly on the gantry adverts and the faces in the grandstand. I also note the car shadow falls slightly off the bottom of the screen. Switching back to the arcade, I've now set it to the actual pixel aspect ratio of 10:7 that the arcade runs in, which makes it a bit wider. Let's wipe across to the version in Yakuza 0 now. You'll notice the picture is scaled up further, so some pixels fall off the bottom of the screen. It's also sometimes blurry. The 7th Yakuza game, Like a Dragon, also uses this port, but runs without the blur filter, as shown here. Sadly, the fake plastic arcade surround stays on when playing full screen. Wiping across to Judgment, you'll see it's pixel identical to Yakuza Like a Dragon. Now, let's go back to the arcade running at 4:3 aspect ratio. Watch what happens when I wipe across to the Yakuza 6 version. It's almost pixel perfect, with the sprites shifting 1 pixel to the left. Let's compare this version to the one that was in Shenmue 2, and watch the car sprite in particular. You can see how different it looks in Shenmue 2. Finally, let's go back to the arcade at 10:7 aspect ratio. And now let's wipe across to the Cannonball enhanced OutRun engine. It's high resolution, widescreen goodness. It's time to go head to head. Again, we'll compare Coconut Beach, Devil's Canyon and Gateway across all versions of the game at the same time. For the DOS version, I'll switch between Bleep Chip and Tandy audio.
Ready?
The original version of OutRun is a memorable part of arcade gaming of the 1980s. The DOS port, although smooth animating, is more a remake of the arcade and somewhat too easy. The Shenmue 2 port has several issues and with its higher resolution sprites doesn't quite feel arcade accurate. Yakuza 0 has a bit of the screen cut off and can appear blurry. Yakuza 6 is very close to the arcade, but the handling feels a little off. Yakuza Like a Dragon and Judgment are identical, but Judgment has too much background street noise playing over the top. Overall, Cannonball is the best way to experience OutRun on a PC, and it's not even officially by Sega. If I had to choose one of the Sega ports to play, it'd probably be the version in Yakuza Like a Dragon, even though a few pixels are missing from the image. If you like this comparison of OutRun on the PC, then please give it a like, or subscribe, ring the bell, leave a comment, put your roof down and drive to some cool tunes. And join me next time for a scary journey into space.